The Holy Trinity, which we celebrated on Sunday, is the only festival in the Christian calendar which commemorates not a person or an event, but an article of faith. It's therefore very difficult to describe, which is why the Church began to try by drawing on words that spoke of the majesty, the wonder, and the activity of God. Do you remember in the book of Revelation how the writer had a vision of heaven and could only use the language of his earthly experience to try to describe it? To express the sovereignty of God, he wrote about a throne, and God the source of light, like precious stones which sparkle. They were the brightest things he knew. Power was described as fire, and so on. Everything from within the writer's own experience. Before I was ordained, I was an absurdly young welfare officer in Pentonville Prison. I remember a prisoner, Sean. He was about my age. We'd managed to get him a placement on a farm down in Wiltshire when he left the prison. He'd been brought up in a terrible home in South London, and he wrote to tell me about his new environment. It's so big here, lots of sky, and it's dead quiet. There's animals that look like white lions. Those were woolly sheep, but there hadn't been any of those in Bermondsey. Sean, though he didn't know it, nor did I at that time, by the way, was doing what the writer of Revelation had done. They were both trying to describe what was beyond their powers of description. In Revelation, the writer was writing about God in the only way he could. So it is for us. We can't explain God, we can't describe God, but we can worship God. Like King Uzziah in the temple, described by Isaiah listening to the seraphs calling out to each other, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Trinity Sunday reminds us that worship is our duty and our joy, because in worship we recall the activity of God, however little we understand of it. An elderly worshipper told me wistfully of the days when there were 20 priests celebrating at the altar in St. Mary's on festival days. Well, there aren't now, but we are still here, worshipping God and singing "Holy, Holy, Holy" to the best of our ability when conditions allow. It's in our worship that we draw near to Jesus, who offers himself to us in the sacrament of his body and blood, which is still at the heart of the life of this parish. When Jesus reappeared to the disciples after his resurrection, they came alive as never before, because the Spirit of God enabled them to experience a life larger than death and to tell everyone about it. At the end of Sunday's Gospel reading, we read, "God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." Well, that's true. And through the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we have our little part to play.